I never thought I'd watch the people I loved turn into strangers. I never thought I'd have to fight for the right to exist in the family I gave everything for. My name is Clara Bennett, and this is the story of love, betrayal, and the quiet war they never saw coming. Get your coffee, hold it tight, and come with me, because this story doesn't start with hatred. It starts with heartbreak. I knew something was wrong the second I walked into that hospital room. The bed was made, machines humming, but the chair by the window was empty. Then I saw him, my father, sitting up, pale but smiling, like he'd been waiting for me all along. The air smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. I clutched the coffee I'd brought, feeling the paper cup crumple slightly in my grip. Where was everyone? I was sure they'd be here today. The cold reality sank into my chest. Once again, it was just me. I knew you'd come, Dad said, voice thin but warm. His words hit harder than any accusation. I set the coffee on the table and pulled up the chair, my heart breaking a little at how small he looked under those white hospital sheets. I hadn't realized how much he'd shrunk until now. I wanted to ask about Mom, Andrew, the others, but I already knew the answer. Deep down, I always knew. When the fight gets ugly, I'm the only one who stays. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the beeping of the monitor and the distant rattle of a food cart. I glanced at the bouquet by his bedside, already drooping, and wondered if Mom even remembered she had a husband in the hospital. My throat tightened, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't here for them. I was here for him, for the man who had once carried me on his shoulders and called me his little miracle. Dad chuckled dryly, breaking the heavy silence. Vivian's in Aspen, he said. With her friends. I didn't need him to spell it out. Everyone knew what friends meant when my mother said it. My stomach twisted in disgust. I pictured her laughing over cocktails, while the man she promised to love was hooked up to IVs, fighting for breath. Anger flared in me, hot, sharp, and useless. What was wrong with his family? Andrew's too busy running the company, Dad added, his mouth curving into a sad little smile. Lucas and Emily. Well, you know them. I did. Oh God, I did. Busy with their important projects. Their business trips. Always too busy to visit. Always full of excuses that smelled suspiciously like lies. Meanwhile, I'd been juggling work and hospital runs, hoping, stupidly, that this time, maybe they'd show up. I reached out and covered Dad's hand with mine. His skin felt paper thin, like a fragile map of all the years he had given to people who didn't deserve him. You're not alone, I whispered. My voice broke a little, but I didn't care. Tears threatened behind my lashes, but I blinked them back. He needed strength, not more broken promises. He squeezed my hand, the tiniest pressure, but it said everything. For a while we just sat there. No talking, no pretending. Just two people who understood that love isn't measured by blood, but by who stays when everyone else walks away. The sun dipped lower outside, painting the sterile walls in muted gold. Dad closed his eyes, but his grip on my hand never faltered. I stayed until the nurses kicked me out, promising I'd be back first thing in the morning. As I drove home, headlights slicing through the early evening fog, a thought gnawed at the edges of my mind. Why had Dad looked so prepared? Like he wasn't just waiting for company, but waiting for a decision to be made. I shook my head, trying to shake off the chill crawling up my spine. But deep down I knew something was coming, something that would change everything. I parked outside my apartment, engine ticking as it cooled. My phone buzzed with a message from Andrew. Make sure Dad takes his meds. Heading to the club tonight. Busy week ahead. My fingers trembled as I read it, rage boiling up my throat. They'd written him off. They were counting the days. I didn't know what the next few weeks would bring, but I swore to myself, standing there in the cold, whatever it was, I would be ready. I almost didn't notice the envelope at first. It was tucked under Dad's lunch tray the next morning, casual like it was nothing. But when he caught my eye and nodded toward it, my stomach tightened. For you, he said simply. His voice was weaker today, thinner, like the hospital air was stealing pieces of him. I slid the envelope into my purse without opening it, my hands trembling just enough to give me away. Something heavy shifted inside me. I knew this wasn't just a letter. It was a beginning and an ending. The morning passed in a strange, heavy silence. I read to him from the newspaper, even though I knew he barely cared about the headlines. I fixed the blankets when the nurse left them bunched at his feet. I adjusted the window blinds to keep the harsh sunlight off his face. Little things, pointless things, but they made me feel like I was fighting for him, even if no one else bothered. It felt like building a sandcastle against a rising tide. Futile. Necessary. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked like dry paper. You know they're planning to push you out, right? My heart stumbled in my chest. I set down the paper and looked at him, really looked into those tired, sharp eyes. They think when I'm gone, you'll be easy to erase. That you'll just walk away. His words hit harder than I expected. Because somewhere, deep inside, I had feared the same. Maybe a part of me had already started preparing to disappear. I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it, but no sound came out. Because he was right. I'd heard the snide comments, the sideways glances, the way Vivian and Andrew treated me like a tolerated inconvenience. Like charity, not family, not blood, and in their minds, blood was everything. My throat burned with unshed tears, but I forced myself to stay still, to listen. For once, the truth hurt less than pretending everything was fine. You're stronger than they think, Dad said, a fierce light flaring in his sunken face. And I'm going to make sure they can't touch you. I blinked at him, not trusting what I was hearing. Was this real? Was he serious? He coughed, a harsh sound that rattled in the sterile room, then motioned for me to bring the envelope. My fingers fumbled as I pulled it out, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. I wasn't ready, but maybe I would never be. Inside was a simple letter and a flash drive. The letter explained everything: plans, documents, passwords, evidence of a trust he was establishing, legal documents naming me his successor in the company, secret accounts set up for my protection. I stared at the papers, numb, unable to breathe. Why? I whispered. My voice sounded so small, so broken. Because you're the only one who stayed, he said, for words that shattered my heart completely. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the letter against my chest. For years I believed I was invisible, tolerated out of duty. But he'd seen me. All along, he'd seen me. I wanted to hug him, to say something profound, but all I managed was a choked out, "Thank you." He smiled, soft and tired, like a man who'd been carrying a burden alone for far too long. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "It's going to get ugly." His voice was a whisper, but the weight of it thundered. The words hung between us like a storm cloud. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw not just a frail old man, but a fighter. Someone who had decided to go down swinging, dragging truth into the light. And he wanted me to be part of that final battle. I didn't know if I had the strength. I didn't know if I could survive it. But sitting there, holding the proof in my hands, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to run. Not this time. I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of it settle over me like armor. The world outside the hospital felt far away now. All that mattered was the man in this room and the war we were about to fight together. And if they thought I was going to roll over and disappear, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I sat a little straighter in the chair, my heart pounding, my hands steady. Let them come. I was ready to fight for what mattered. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a heart full of battle plans. The flash drive from Dad burned a hole in my purse as I drove to the hospital under a leaden sky. Each red light felt like a warning, each gust of wind a whisper. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I wasn't, but that didn't matter anymore. I pulled into the parking lot, cut the engine, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Ready or not, the war had already begun. Dad's room felt heavier today, like the walls themselves knew what was brewing. He smiled weakly when he saw me, motioning me closer with a trembling hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked, voice hoarse. Like a soldier before the first shot, I admitted, forcing a smile. His laugh was a low, broken rumble. Good, because this isn't just about you. It's about righting a wrong. I nodded, swallowing hard. Somewhere deep inside, I could already feel the old version of myself cracking apart. After breakfast, we reviewed the first batch of documents. Passwords to offshore accounts, ownership papers tucked away under shell companies, backup plans for backup plans. I took notes furiously, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of trust he was placing in me. Each piece of paper felt like a weapon slipped into my hands. Proof that love isn't given lightly. Proof that family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty proven through fire. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A group text from Andrew. Quick update. Heading out for a long weekend. Aspen is beautiful this time of year. Aspen. Again. I stared at the message, ball rising in my throat. They hadn't even bothered to check in. Just left him there, like an old coat tossed over a chair. Dad watched my face carefully, reading every flicker of rage and heartbreak like it was printed in bold letters. Let them think they're winning, he said quietly, his voice steady like a blade. In the late afternoon, we staged a normal scene. I opened my laptop and pretended to work while Dad rested. Nurses came and went oblivious, but underneath the surface, we were soldiers in a secret war. Every look, every whispered conversation, every scribbled note, we were fortifying ourselves for the siege. And every moment they stayed away, their guilt grew heavier, their neglect sharper. We were gathering invisible ammunition they wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I stayed long after visiting hours ended, the nurses turning a blind eye. Dad told me about the company's hidden debts, about the silent partnerships he'd kept out of reach of Vivian and Andrew. They think money is loyalty, he said, eyes burning. They're wrong. Loyalty can't be bought. It's proven. I jotted every word down like gospel, my heart hammering with a furious, determined beat. They thought they could erase me. They thought wrong. They underestimated the wrong daughter. By the time I left, the hospital corridors were empty and echoing. I walked past the dark windows, my reflection ghostly and unfamiliar. I wasn't the quiet, grateful daughter anymore. I was something sharper now, something forged in abandonment and betrayal. I tightened my coat around me and stepped into the night, each step a vow. I wouldn't be silent. I wouldn't disappear. Not this time. They didn't know it yet, but their days of easy victories were over. I was coming for everything they stole. Back home, I hid the flash drive inside the hollow base of a lamp, just like Dad had taught me. I triple-locked the doors and closed all the blinds. My laptop glowed in the darkness as I started scanning and organizing the documents. Bank statements, property deeds, contracts. Each file was a nail in the coffin they were building for themselves, and they didn't even know it yet. I smiled grimly at the screen, feeling the adrenaline buzz under my skin like electricity. As I shut down the laptop and leaned back in my chair, a thought struck me so hard it left me breathless. They'd spent years underestimating me. They had no idea who they were dealing with now. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the hospital like nothing had changed. I'd smile, play the dutiful daughter, and gather every last secret they tried to hide. Because when the moment came, I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win, and they would never see it coming. The first sign came when Vivian called the hospital for the first time in weeks. I was sitting by Dad's bedside, helping him sort through old company reports, when the nurse popped her head in. "Your mother's on the line," she said, voice unsure. My stomach twisted. Not my mother. I stood up slowly and took the call in the hallway, the handset cold against my ear. "Clara, darling," Vivian crooned. "I hope you're keeping everything under control." Her voice was sweet enough to rot my teeth. I gripped the receiver tighter. "Dad's stable," I said flatly, keeping my tone neutral. I could practically hear her fake smile over the line. "Wonderful," she chirped. "Andrew's swamped at the office, poor thing. Lucas and Emily are juggling projects too. You understand, right?" I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I understood perfectly. They were lining up their excuses, preparing their alibis, leaving me to carry the burden, and soon they thought the grief. "I'll be back next week," Vivian added lightly. "Unless, of course, something urgent happens." There it was, the hint, the probing for an update without asking directly. I wanted to laugh, or scream. Instead, I murmured, "I'll keep you posted." I hung up without waiting for her sugary goodbye. Back in Dad's room, he looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. "The vultures are starting to circle," he said. His voice was thin but steady. "Good. Let them." The next day, Lucas posted a photo on Instagram, him lounging on a yacht with a glass of champagne, captioned, "Work hard, play harder." I stared at it in disbelief. Dad was here, fighting for every breath, and Lucas was flaunting his newest toy. My fingers itched to comment, to call him out, but I resisted. Let them show the world who they really were. Every picture, every careless caption was another weapon for my side. They were digging their own graves. All I had to do was wait. At the hospital, Dad grew weaker, but his mind remained sharp. He insisted we rehearse. "They'll challenge it," he warned, voice rasping. "They'll say you manipulated me." The word stung, but I knew he was right. We practiced answering questions. We rehearsed timelines. We cataloged every visit, every call, every absence. I documented everything, even recording voice memos when Dad felt strong enough to talk. Our arsenal was growing, quiet and lethal. One evening, as twilight blurred the world outside, Dad asked me to retrieve something from his safety deposit box. "The real deeds," he said, coughing. "The real contracts." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I went the next morning, presenting the worn key to a banker who smiled sadly and led me to the vault. Inside, in a plain envelope, lay documents that would destroy every assumption Vivian, Andrew, Lucas, and Emily had made about their future. Back in the hospital, I spread the documents across Dad's tray table. His hands shook as he touched each page, like he was blessing them. "You'll know what to do," he said. His faith in me was terrifying, exhilarating, a responsibility heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I folded the papers carefully, tucking them into a folder labeled simply Truth. It was a promise, a shield, a sword. Their lies were paper thin. The truth was iron. That night, I sat by his bed long after he fell asleep, listening to the mechanical hiss of the oxygen machine. In the dim light, he looked smaller than ever, a fragile shell wrapped in too many tubes and wires. But in my eyes, he was still a giant, a warrior who had built an empire and fought for the daughter no one else wanted. Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and burning. I wasn't crying for myself. I was crying for him, and for the battle we both knew was coming. I rested my head lightly against his arm, feeling the slow, stubborn beat of his heart beneath my ear. "I won't let them win," I whispered into the darkness. My voice was shaky but fierce. The machines beeped steadily, a soft mechanical lullaby. Outside, the night deepened, heavy with promises and threats. Tomorrow, the game would shift. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But tonight, it was just me and him, and the quiet, furious love that would change everything. The call came at 6:12 a.m. I was curled up on the recliner in Dad's hospital room, half awake, when the phone buzzed against my leg. Andrew's name lit up the screen, and my heart jumped. I answered quickly, whispering so I wouldn't wake Dad. "Yeah," I said. His voice was sharp, almost panicked. "The board's asking questions. Someone leaked that Dad's transferring assets." I closed my eyes, steadying my breathing. The first crack had appeared. They were already losing control. "I don't know anything about that," I said, keeping my voice soft, confused, innocent. Andrew cursed under his breath. "Find out," he snapped before hanging up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse thrumming with a dangerous satisfaction. They were scrambling, and they didn't even know the half of it yet. I turned and looked at Dad, who was awake now, watching me with those clear, sharp eyes. "It's starting," I said quietly. He nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across his lips. Later that morning, Vivian showed up at the hospital, dripping in designer clothes and fake concern. Her perfume hit me before her voice did, cloying and suffocating. "Darling," she cooed, sweeping into the room like she owned it. "How's our patient?" I stepped aside, letting her have her performance. Dad didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes, exhausted and unimpressed. I folded my arms, leaning against the wall, watching the act unfold like bad theater. She stayed for less than 10 minutes, fussing with his blanket, snapping a few selfies beside his bed like she was doing charity work. "I'll be back later," she said brightly, kissing the air near his forehead. Her heels clicked down the hallway, leaving behind a trail of expensive indifference. I wanted to scream, or cry, or both. Instead, I helped Dad sit up, adjusted his fore, and silently promised him she wouldn't get away with it. Not this time. That afternoon, Lucas and Emily finally made their grand appearance. Lucas brought a smoothie he left untouched on the table. Emily complained about the parking. They stayed long enough to post an obligatory hospital selfie, complete with sad faces and the caption, "Family first." Always. I took a picture of them from the corner of the room, filing it away with all the others. Evidence. Proof of the performance. Proof of their lies. Every fake smile was another nail in their coffin. That evening, the lawyer Dad had hired in secret, Mr. Hargrove, came to the hospital. A man with steel-gray hair and a voice like gravel, he carried a leather briefcase full of final papers. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked Dad gently. Dad's eyes locked on mine. "Absolutely," he rasped. His signature was shaky but determined as he signed the last amendments. Witnessed. Notarized. Final. The weight of it settled over the room like a final breath. When Mr. Hargrove left, he handed me a folder thick with documents. "Guard these carefully," he said. "You'll need them soon." I clutched the folder to my chest as if it could protect me. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. Part of me wanted to run, to pretend I hadn't seen the way they treated him, the way they already mourned his fortune but not his life. But the stronger part of me, the part he had believed in, knew there was no going back. That night, I sat by his side, reading softly from his favorite book, The Old Man and the Sea. His breathing was shallow, uneven. His hand twitched against the sheets. I paused, blinking back tears, and he opened his eyes just a crack. "Proud of you," he whispered. Just 2 words. But they were enough to steady my heart, enough to anchor me when everything else was slipping away. I squeezed his hand gently, promising him silently I wouldn't let his faith be wasted. As midnight crept over the city, I stepped outside the hospital for a breath of cold air. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, the world muffled and waiting. I closed my eyes and let the chill bite into my skin. Tomorrow, they would come. Tomorrow, the reading of the will would tear apart every lie they had built. Tomorrow, they would finally see that the girl they had tried to erase was the one holding all the power. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. They arrived dressed in black, like they thought mourning was something you could fake with a dress code. Vivian wore oversized sunglasses even inside the lawyer's office, dabbing at invisible tears. Andrew's jaw was tight, his hand resting protectively over his designer watch. Lucas and Emily sat stiffly in the corner, whispering to each other like children waiting for candy. I sat alone on the opposite side of the room, the folder of documents heavy in my lap. The final game was about to begin. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and opened the meeting with dry formality. Robert Bennett's final will and testament, witnessed and notarized under full mental capacity, will now be read aloud. I held my breath as the lawyer's voice filled the room, reading words that felt like thunder. Words that would shatter the polished image they had spent years pretending to uphold. Words that would expose who had truly been loved and who had only been tolerated. Vivian leaned forward eagerly when her name was mentioned first. Her smile froze as the lawyer calmly stated she had been left a single keepsake, a first-edition book they once shared, and nothing more. Andrew's face reddened when he was bequeathed a symbolic $1, a legal tactic to block any contesting. Lucas and Emily received the same. A book. $1. Nothing more. I heard Vivian's sharp intake of breath, like a wounded animal. But it was only beginning. And the remainder of the estate, Mr. Hargrove continued, his voice steady, including full controlling shares of Bennett Industries, liquid assets and properties, is to be transferred to Clara Bennett in recognition of her loyalty, love, and service. Silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room exploded, Vivian screeching, Andrew shouting about fraud, Lucas pounding the table, Emily crying. I sat perfectly still, the storm raging around me, untouched and unbothered. Mr. Hargrove raised his hand calmly. There are multiple witness testimonies, video recordings, and documented neglect detailed in Robert's final statement, he said. Any attempt to contest this will likely fail and expose further evidence to public record. Vivian paled. Andrew's fists clenched at his sides. Lucas and Emily stared at the table, the reality crashing down on them like a tidal wave. They had lost, and it was no one's fault but their own. Vivian turned to me then, her voice dripping venom. You manipulated him, she hissed. You poisoned him against his own blood. I stood up slowly, feeling the ground solid beneath me for the first time in years. He saw you for what you are, I said, my voice low but unshakable. And he chose me for words. That's all it took to break whatever fantasy she had built in her mind. She recoiled like I'd slapped her. Andrew muttered something under his breath. I didn't care enough to listen. I walked out of the office into the cold December air, the sun struggling to break through heavy gray clouds. The folder still clutched in my hand wasn't just paperwork. It was proof that love isn't biology, that loyalty isn't blood, that staying, when it's hardest, means more than any name you're born with. Dad had known it, and now the world would too. I breathed in deeply, letting the winter air burn my lungs clean. I wasn't just surviving. I was taking back everything they tried to steal. That night, I stood alone in the office overlooking the city skyline, keys to the company resting heavy in my pocket. The lights below twinkled like promises, like futures waiting to be built. I thought of Dad, of the strength he had given me, of the trust he had placed in my hands. I promised him silently that I would protect it, grow it, honor it, not for revenge, not for them, but for us, for the bond they could never understand, because it wasn't built on greed. It was built on love. I turned away from the window and walked deeper into the office, the world wide open before me. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I thought about all the times they made me feel small, and smiled. I wasn't the charity case or the afterthought. I was Clara Bennett, daughter by choice, heir by love, and survivor by fire. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I was building a new one, and they would never get a place. Not now. Not ever again. If you like this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and if you want to help me keep telling these stories, you can buy me a coffee. The link is there in the first pinned comment. Every cup helps me keep bringing you more stories.